Hello, heretics and heathens. This is Veritas Voices. I'm Lilith and I'm here with Renee. We're here to start the new year. Sort of. Technically, our last episode aired in the new year, but we didn't record it in 2020, so it doesn't count. That's what I think. Anyway, what about you, Renee?
Yeah, I mean, we did record it very near the end of 2019, but 2020 is still young, so I would say the topic is still fresh and we can still talk about it in good conscience.
Fair enough. We're not even a week in. Now, I know that in North America there's a tradition of making New Year's resolutions. Is it the same in Germany and Europe in general?
I would say that it has definitely become a tradition. Like, I know a lot of people who make New Year's resolutions. I don't know if that has been a thing for many years now, but I've grown up with it. I have made some resolutions of my own, and it's a thing that Germans do nowadays.
Okay, so it's not uncommon. I know I always found it a bit silly as though you could just make a resolution. I suppose I understand now after the holidays especially you usually gain a bunch of weight because there's all the baking in the universe and maybe you like, I want to start the new year off on a better foot or something equivalent. But I never found the new year to be motivating with regard to resolutions.
Yeah,
Um, Usually I would make a New Year's resolution not to make any future New Year's resolutions, and then I would do it again next year just to be sure I broke my resolution.
yeah. I mean, for me personally, I have made resolutions in the past which were completely during the way when I was just thinking, okay, this is going wrong. This is not the direction I want to go. I'm gonna make a promise to myself right now, and it's gonna be fulfilled.
And
That's
did that
much more
work?
motivating. That did actually work. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good then. Um, I know it certainly doesn't always for everybody, but if you're really regarding it as a promise to yourself, then maybe that would work. Um, I guess it's a bit different that way. Have you ever, I know when you were a deist, you believed in, sort of like a broad, beneficial power kind of a god. Um, did you ever ask for God's help with things?
Well, as I said before, the moments where my theistic beliefs shine through the greatest was at the point when I was singing in front of a test within class. That's when my theism came out.
Yeah, I suppose we've all done that. Oh God, don't let me fail geometry or
Yeah.
physics or
But
calculus or whatever.
but other than that, when I really made resolutions within my own life, I was always thinking to myself, I will get this done, and like the thought of God helping me in that regard with my problems never really came up for me.
That's interesting. So,
It's not even something that I would really consider asking for.
fair enough. Fair enough. I know, I mean, I had a very different experience. I actually found the proposed help of God to be quite debilitating. There are a lot of scriptures that are meant to encourage someone who's at the end of their rope, um, you know, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. You'll do whatever, the battle does not go to or the race does not go to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but things go to who God ordains and God supports. There's all sorts of there's all sorts of encouragement not to do anything by your own power, but if you start with that, um you can feel like trying to do anything by your own power is somehow inferior to trying to do it by God's power, which um is remarkably impotent for actually doing anything. Although sometimes people will help you, and you're supposed to credit that to God, especially if they're Christians, because, the Holy Spirit is inspiring them to help you.
Yeah,
Because
and God
reasons.
sort of God sort of put these people there when you needed them, and it's a miracle or a sign from the Lord, and He is blessing you in your life.
Exactly, exactly. It couldn't be anything like, the fact that you have family and friends who love you and relationships you've invested years in, and they would want to help you the same way you would want to help them. No, 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 no. It's because God.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, if a total random stranger, maybe I could see that. But even then, I've been the total random stranger who helped someone. And I actually, at that time, would have attributed my being in that place at that time to God because that's what I was trained to do. Um, when in reality, it was just the fact that I like helping people.
yeah. As I think many people do. Like I also have been in the position of a stranger helping another stranger out, but yeah, it's not like God put me there for that
Yeah.
purpose.
Um, there was one time I had a job singing at a church um, when I was living in Toronto, but it snowed very, very heavily one day, and I was called and they said, "Don't bother coming in. It's not safe for transit. We're just don't even like we're telling people if people come to church, that's okay, but we're telling people don't risk it." Um, so I was fidgety and I went outside and I found this little old lady walking to church. So I offered her my arm and I walked with her to her church, Catholic church. And I'd never been to a Catholic mass, so I sat in the back and then walked her back. And she was very, very sweet and overwhelmed by my willingness to help her walk through snowdrifts for 2 blocks. And invited me to her place. She actually, it was really adorable. She knit me a little scarf and hat and invited me to come over one time and I had cookies and tea with her. She was very, very nice. But even then, I attributed that to God having sent me out into the storm as and I think I made that connection in part because it was Sunday and because I did want I had that, desire to worship, connect with God, etc. And so when I went out and helped someone, I interpreted it in that light.
Yeah, but I think that is also really diminishing, and or I can imagine, or I think it was probably really diminishing for you that you couldn't take the credit, and it was really you being nice. It was God using you in that way to help that lady.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't one of the times when I felt really imposed on by the belief. It was actually more growing up as a child when I felt like I couldn't even try things because I didn't know what God wanted me to try, what his plan was. And people would try and induce me into taking a direction by saying, God can only steer a ship if it's moving. But ugh, it never made much sense to me. The whole thing was just very, there was never a right answer. And, to people who haven't grown up with religious black and white thinking, that may not seem like such a bad thing. But when you start with everything on the premise that a bad opinion or a wrong opinion or a mistake means you deserve to go to hell, then you really need to know the answer. You need an answer like right off.
Yeah,
A single, clear, correct answer. Because you can't fuck up
yeah.
or you're dead.
But anyways, what I'm interested in is because our topic is New Year's resolutions. How did you, or how do Christians experience New Year's resolutions, and how would God come into play that sort of in that sort of thing?
Well, that's the thing. Basically, it's, determining something. Um, but you'll often, instead of making a clear resolution like, I want to spend more time with my family. I want to travel to at least one destination. I want to lose 15 pounds. Something that, is clear. You
Yeah.
often end up making spiritual resolutions, which likewise have no clear point of accomplishment. I want to grow closer to God. I want to spend more time in prayer. I want the Lord to use me this year in a new way. Um, the things whose interpretation is widely variable,
Yeah.
and depending on your self esteem and your behavior, you can decide you've completed it or not.
Yeah.
And
And
it's,
obviously, then if you haven't completed it, then the fault lies with you rather than with God.
of course, and even ordinary resolutions, there's a lot of relying on prayer to motivate you so that if you do fail at your resolution, um, like a more specific, clear resolution, like lose 15 pounds or travel, then you haven't just failed you failed God, because you clearly didn't reach out enough to Him to rely on His strength to do whatever the hell it was you said you were going to do.
Sort of, you you didn't ask enough for God, or didn't come to
Right.
Him strong enough in order for Him to grant you what you set out to accomplish.
Exactly. It's all about clinging to God, trusting God, relying on God, fully relying on God, So maybe you only partly relied on Him, and that wasn't enough. So I guess now
So
you're just a failure.
yeah, and it always comes back to not maybe you being too weak for yourself, or you not being motivated enough, but simply God not being pleased with how you approached Him and how you handled yourself in that particular year.
Yeah, it's your fault, but not in the normal healthy way that your own mistakes are your fault. It's this weird warp. It's kind of funny because I think most Christians would sort of instinctively recoil, how do you get anything done without relying on God? But it's actually a lot easier because you don't have this imaginary, perfect, all powerful, all knowing thing to impress or potentially fail because, you know, nothing you ever do is guaranteed to be good enough.
Yeah, and I think it's also at least for me as an atheist, or even when I made resolutions as a deist where I didn't rely on God, when I made a resolution, I think it was in 12th grade, my last school year, I made sort of in September the resolution that I was going to lose weight because
Hmm.
I thought I was having too much weight, and I was, to be fair. But I was at that point realizing, okay, I don't have any excuses. I have to do this for myself. And if I don't accomplish this, then it is my fault. And I want to accomplish this. I want to look better. And yeah,
Fair
there's
enough.
nothing that can hinder me or help me with it other than myself.
Fair enough. Yeah, I have to say that's the way I it's novel to me, I guess, to look at things in that way, in a way that it probably isn't to you. To say, okay, it's my responsibility to do this and nobody else's. And I'm accountable to myself, which means I can think about it in practical terms. I can go, okay, maybe this is a bit too lofty or broad a goal. I need to make, single goal steps. Like I want to improve in this area, so I want to, increase a little bit and a little bit and a little bit here, and then I can make some progress. As
Yeah,
opposed to just, believe harder.
yeah. And come closer to God. And the goal is so nebulous that, yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
it can be interpreted however
Well, and it
one
makes even
sees fit.
yeah, and it makes even clearer goals nebulous because obviously.
Yeah, the reasons you mentioned.
Yeah, true enough. Ugh, I'm sorry. I really don't like Christianity.
Yeah.
It kind of fucks with my head a lot.
Yeah, I think it fucks with a lot of people's heads. I mean, I interact with Christians daily, and not that I think that they are delusional, but I do think that they are overly biased, and I do think that Christianity is ultimately hurting them.
I agree. I agree.
But
I it's funny because in addition to the things that you would normally want to take responsibility for, like, you know, improving your life in various ways, getting a promotion, improving your health, whatever, having some education goals, any of those things, you have to have all of these spiritual growth goals. Do you have any experience with this, maybe secondhand?
um, not really. I mean, I haven't, I think, gotten any encounters with any religious people where they told me, yeah, I have that goal and that goal and that goal. About my spiritual life, other than maybe people on the internet. But hey, that's what you're here for. I mean, I'm a former deist. I don't have your perspective. Maybe you can elaborate it
Oh,
and
gladly.
explain it to me.
I was wondering when I say things like spiritual growth, um, what what does that bring to mind, I guess, for you?
Spiritual growth, I think what that brings to mind is becoming more well versed within scripture, becoming more prayerful, praying more often, relying more on God, trying to build on that relationship with the help of prayer and that sort of stuff. That is the associations that I make.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Um, of course, it's all about your personal relationship with God, and so all of those are
Purely subjective.
exactly very
Yeah,
subjective. It's kind of funny because there'll often be preachers who will, they'll promote their particular form of prayer or Bible study or whatever as the best way, and maybe you could do it some other way, but that's not the best way. And I had a youth pastor, a really good youth pastor. Not a she liked to she helped push us a little bit towards thinking in ways that were a bit rebellious. So I appreciate that about her still. But she would tell this story of how she as at Bible school they got some big guilt inducing speech about how you should have prayer and Bible study first thing in the morning because you should give God your best hours instead of the time at the end of the day when you are already worn out. And she is not a morning person.
yeah,
Neither am I. We were both the, oh, it's morning, coffee now,
yeah.
now. So, um, but she felt guilty, as you do when these ministers get all snotty about things. So she, you know, got up, set an alarm early the next morning, and picked up her Bible and started reading it. And then she fell asleep, literally reading her Bible, and the Bible fell on her face. And when she woke up, she had drooled on the page, and the drool stopped at the line, "Open your mouth that I may fill it,"
Wow.
which she interpreted, honestly, not that unreasonably, as God having a laugh and saying, "Chill out," which, if you have to interpret it as a sign from God, I'd far rather it be that than
Yeah,
God being a douche, as he so often is.
yeah. Well, another issue which I wanted to ask you because you brought up those resolutions, and you told me earlier that you weren't really that resolution type of person. Did sort of the Christians around you share what they wanted to accomplish for the new year, or was that something that's only private to you?
Um, Sometimes, not often. It wasn't like a big thing where everybody shared. Uh, Also, it's more of like a broader cultural thing. I didn't live in a family where everyone made a New Year's resolution. So yeah, it wasn't really a specifically Christian thing or anything, at least not in my experience. There could be
Yeah,
cultural bubbles that totally do set up the new year. There would just, there'd always be a sermon about new beginnings or something, because of course there was. Uh, yeah, that's about it.
And that's sort of when the congregation sort of set out these goals for themselves, and they were usually
Oh, yeah, but it was a
growing
totally
closer.
individual thing. There wasn't
Yeah,
like, yeah, no one was saying you had to make a New Year's resolution specifically. There was just sort of a broad, let's all be more godly this year
yeah,
because Jesus.
yeah. And because it obviously helps us.
Of
Because
course.
one thing which I also have encountered with on Twitter within sort of these evangelistic people which I follow on Twitter is I think it was Sean McDowell or someone like that who posted an article about the resolution that Christians have about reading the entire Bible in the next year and reading the Bible daily so that they can finish the Bible in the entire year. And what he suggested was not reading the entire Bible, but reading specifically the New Testament and sort of the books that Christians tend to favor over books like Deuteronomy or Leviticus.
Yeah. It's funny. Everyone finds Deuteronomy and Leviticus boring, and there are a lot of rules that are like, oh, you should put tassels on the robes of the priests, and they have to have this and that breastplate. And I still never found them boring, because there was a lot of, uh, there was a lot to read between the lines. Let's just say.
Yeah.
Um, I found Psalms boring. Psalms were incredibly boring. I found Psalms more boring than Leviticus. So that's saying
On,
something.
honestly, for me, the most boring was Chronicles, especially
Mm.
the first half of First Chronicles. Like, I nearly quit reading the Bible of that because the chronologies just wouldn't end. It was just so, okay, when is it ever gonna get fun again
And
here?
so and so did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord smote him. And then his son did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord smote him. And then his son did evil. And yeah, that's
Yeah,
super fun.
yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, I remember that. It's kind of funny. We should do an episode at one point about Bible reading, because there's this kind of, you know, um, Chrissy Stroop has tweeted about how frustrating it is for evangelicals when people say, you guys don't really read the Bible, because they spend all this time reading the Bible. Like, seriously, so much time reading the Bible. And yet there are all these parts of it they don't read.
Yeah. Like what I would say is that yes, Christians definitely do read the Bible, but do they read the entire Bible? I think hardly anyone does.
Hmm.
That's sort
And
of where I come from.
in especially in older fashioned Bibles, I can still remember when this was the norm. They used to print them where they were sort of like two columns on each page, and you would read down each column, and then in between you would have what would be the footnotes, typically, but it was a reference, any verse that you might be tempted to misunderstand. There would be like an end note or a page note, indicating three other verses that you could compare it to, which might help to give you the correct perspective on that verse.
Yeah,
Um, Usually, this had less to do with actual historical references to the person involved or anything like that, and more to do with how they would like you to interpret the verse theologically.
yeah,
So, Bible reading is very manipulative, quite honestly.
yeah. Sort of an internal apologetics, and
Oh, yeah.
that's also the case with translation, where there are sort of translations which favor the Christian perspective more, which especially of the Old Testament when it comes to prophecies and that sort of stuff, where you
Oh,
can
yeah.
sort of
And
twist and
and
turn
and they
things around to make it work.
And they edit out things like when it says in Levitical law that if a man suspects his wife has cheated on him, to take her to the priest and force her to have an abortion by drinking
Yeah,
a potion, and
Numbers
then
5, I think it was.
yeah, exactly. The word for abortion is actually um, it's quite clear, but they interpret it differently in certain translations, and it's like, okay, that's really honest, guys.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I know. Yeah, because good God couldn't possibly have meant that, so obviously we will interpret it in some other way.
yeah. Anyways,
I know.
it's really difficult arguing with these people because obviously when you bring up these topics, then they're already aware of the favorable translation, and you can't get around to them with the unfavorable translation because then you're just from Satan. And yeah,
Well, and there's a great deal of an entire network there brought in to create the ideal interpretation. Um, People don't just read the text bare. They read it with this whole background of expectations, but those expectations have very little to do with actual history. It's sort of whatever version of history has been taught at some point that seems to support the biblical view that they want. Channels like Digital Hammurabi, where they talk about actual Sumerian history, um,
yeah,
they're both, as far as I understand it, more liberal modern Christian, but they're also Assyriologists. So, you know, they know what they're talking about. They're not gonna, they would never take Genesis literally because obviously it's mythical, just like all these other people had mythical stories that, you talk about characters and get a goal for things. How did they interact? What were their choices? That kind of thing. So, yeah, it's that's not the perspective that the average Christian is given to read the Bible with. And actually, the one you mentioned where he was, who was it who said that again? The resolve to read the Bible more this year. Um,
I think Sean McDowell posted an article why you shouldn't read the Bible this year, and he then said only read those few, and if you do that every day, and if you do it diligently and that stuff, then that is going to be more helpful towards your faith, pretty much.
exactly. Well, and that's what they want is the Bible reading is not for information, it's for edification in your faith. So that's also where you end up with, and I've seen so many versions of these. People feel bad as Christians for not having read the whole Bible.
Yeah,
Even still, I'm certain there's some small minor prophet that I haven't read quite through or something. But they would feel horrible about it because it's God's book. It's supposed to build your life on this foundation. So there'd be all kinds of plans to get someone through reading the Bible. Just read 4 chapters a day, or just do this or that or the next thing. And then if that didn't work, often there would be these plans where it's like, okay, you'll read 2 chapters from the Old Testament and one psalm and one thing from the New Testament, and would basically lay it out. But then, of course, what you can do at the same time is create connections in the mind that help certain things to be interpreted in the desirable way.
yeah,
Because the idea is that it's God's book, so it's all connected and coherent, even though it isn't. And it all speaks to you in a living, active sense, um, which has nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that it's been edited and, put together to try and create a coherent narrative after the fact. No, no, no. It's because of the Holy Spirit. So there's a great deal of, honestly, I think often unconscious manipulation to put ideas together in a specific desired way to make it feel natural and authentic. So that
yeah,
to the person who follows this plan, who reads this chapter, but then reads this psalm, but then reads this bit from Jesus' teachings or from Paul's letters, you see a thread that may be entirely manufactured. And I think that's honestly where a lot of the excuses for horrific things in the Old Testament come to feel so natural for certain Christians.
yeah. One thing which I also wanted to ask, because we were sort of bringing up like these apologists discouraging people from reading the entire Bible or only reading certain things, and
Mm-hmm.
they're sort of being challenging for Christians. One resolution which I made is I wanted to read a little bit more next year. I mean, I don't have that much time to read, but because of my studies, but I do plan to read more,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. And one thing which I wanted to do especially was reading some apologetic books. Like, for instance, I have within my reading list, for instance, The Case for Christ, sort of just to, I am already familiar with the arguments that I'm going to see, but seeing it laid out and thinking about it again, what do you think? Is that something that sort of people, if say a Christian were to say, you know what, I am going to deal with atheism and I am going to read the God Delusion, for instance, or something from Bart Ehrman, do you think that would be something that is encouraged or discouraged from the Christian circle?
Oh, discouraged. No, no.
Okay,
They don't want you to actually get your information about atheists from atheists. That would lead to you understanding our side, and frankly, that's how you end up with atheists. Um the idea of they want you to reach out to atheists, but only by understanding them the way the apologist desires. The point of reaching
yeah,
out to atheists is not actually to convert atheists, even though the individual might feel that that's what they're trying to do. The point in the broader context is to strengthen the faith of the believer,
yeah,
to keep them from becoming an atheist. So the important thing, that's why you end up with all these apologists telling these ridiculous stories about how we hate God and have faith in science and dogmatically refuse to consider a creator and whatever other nonsense. That just so much stupid bullshit. That we're like, no, that's not, no, who told you this stupid shit? And the thing is, it was apologists
yeah,
and preachers literally will do diatribes on what atheists think. And I have never heard a single one make an accurate statement,
yeah.
ever.
I mean, that's sort of also my observation with internet apologists, like with people I interact with daily. There comes pretty much a point where I try to reason with them and where I try to explain myself to them, and at some point I just have to come to the realization, or I just spell it out. They aren't trying to reason with me. They're trying to proselytize to me, to evangelize. And if they're reasoning, they are not reasoning with me. They're reasoning at me.
Very much so. Very much so. And the important thing is, for the apologist, is to frame the narrative in such a way that they will never consider your perspective or be able to understand it. Because every time you say, no, that's not what I think, because, you would know what you think, they need the believer to think, see, they're just denying the truth in their hearts and repressing the truth of God, just like the apologist said. And then, there's a whole narrative in place for that. So then they discount everything after, no, that's not what I think,
Yeah,
which is often why I'll actually call out those things as incredibly stupid, because I want to phrase it in a way that shocks them into thinking. Like, who the hell told you anything so stupid? Where did you get such an idiotic idea? You don't. This was like, clearly, the implication being, I don't think you're actually stupid enough to have come up with that on your own. Someone's been telling stories. Who is this person and why are they so dumb or
yeah,
dishonest, which is really more the case. But
yeah,
um, the important thing, honestly, is honestly, I think the first step is just to get a believer to think about the fact that we don't think the way they've been told we think.
Yeah.
And I know for me, that was a big step. I wanted to understand atheists, um, and now I am one. Same thing for Matt Dillahunty. You know, he wanted to convert his atheist roommate. And, you know, obviously he lived with the guy enough to know that he didn't think the way the apologist said. So he decided he should understand the position, which, if you want to engage in a dialogue with someone, it's important to understand their position as much as you can and not just some sad straw man version of it.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, yeah, you can you can potentially respond to them a lot better if you understand their position. And that's something I think a lot of atheists don't do for Christians either. Try to
Yeah.
understand their position. Because it's very hard, if your mind has always been free, to put yourself in the position of someone who feels that they must believe a thing, who is blankly terrified and forbidden to admit that they're terrified about the idea of not believing
Yeah.
some specific proposition.
Yeah. That's also something which, like I have sort of my Christian followers like Franklin Graham and those sort of people who I occasionally just post a question down below under their tweet or say something provocative or disagree with Franklin pretty much, or just to invite them to a dialogue, and then I can engage them in a rational dialogue, and then I can, yeah, try to reason with them and try to figure out where they're at. And also something that I I don't necessarily want to convert them, but I do want to sort of place a stone in their shoe in order to get them to think, because I think that this is pretty much not encouraged by other Christians. And one thing which I also plan to do next year is also another resolution of mine, which relates to Twitter, is maybe not every day, but maybe every other day, maybe every week, just ask them a sort of question which challenges them or which gets them to think, like hypothetical questions like how could you tell if prayer didn't work, or what would the world look like if morality wasn't objective and fixed and absolute, and that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And granted, the way that they define absolute sort of is essentially non functional. Like everything exists in relation to other things. That's what it means to exist.
Yeah.
Um, so it's kind of, yeah, it's,
Or sort of how they would react if they discovered that there actually isn't an objective meaning to life. Diminish what they would that diminish the other things that they value in
mhm.
life? Like
Would you
I
suddenly
don't
stop
have
loving your family?
like I haven't planned it out all, but sort of some challenging questions that should get them to think that, yeah,
It's true. I honestly, I should have more patience in dealing with people, but I'm so frustrated because I know how ridiculous and how harmful these ideas are, and they infuriate me. They really do. Christianity
yeah,
is awful. It's just awful. And
after all, you have been through it.
yeah, and it sucks. And even just if I could get Christians to understand that the version they have in their head of atheists is not a thing that actually exists in reality. Even just that.
Yeah,
Just that. Just you don't actually understand what atheists are. This is some sort of straw man built up by apologists. If you don't want to know what we are, fine, but don't pretend you do. If you want to know what we are, you're going to have to actually think differently.
yeah. I mean, this just sort of something that happened to me this morning, but I was engaged with a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
I think you may know him, and he
Mm-hmm.
was just asking the question of why do the laws of physics work or why does nature work in accordance with the laws of physics, something like that. And I was engaged in a dialogue with him, and it became very apparent that he was adhering to some of sort of themistic metaphysics or some sort of
Yeah,
just some crazy metaphysical outlook, and I was just pointing out to him that no, I'm not stealing from the Christian God. You are in fact stealing from naturalism because you take these concepts or these attributes that you observe within nature, then attribute them to God, and then pretend that what you see in nature is the fact that it's from God. I'm not stealing from your God, you are stealing from naturalism in order to make a case for your God. I was just hammering
exactly.
home this point constantly. And when I engaged with that person at the end of the dialogue, I was just thinking to myself, how can any rational person look at this objectively and possibly think that it's true?
And that's, I mean, the truth of the matter is, objective is a bit of a buzzword because everything is a bit subjective to our experiences. And when we recognize that, we can be more objective because we can
Yeah,
recognize our own understanding and biases. And when there's a limitation or when there's potentially a limitation, and we can investigate that. But it's kind of funny. I was, looking at the work of Colonel Robert Greene Ingersoll, who wrote Mistakes of Moses and was an orator in the 19th century. And he was speaking out against Christian fundamentalism. And the thing is that in those days, it was the downfall of God belief that the universe is governed by laws.
yeah,
Of course, nowadays they try very hard to pretend that prescriptive laws are the same as descriptive laws. But
yeah,
when they were discovering essentially a mechanical universe that, and again, these laws are just things exist and therefore interact in a consistent way because they exist. Um, then in those days, because it got rid of the idea of providence, then God wasn't interfering all the time. And that was his job.
yeah.
So now he's out of that job, and they have to say, well, he put it all in place because he is so smart and has a plan, etc., etc. So,
Yeah. This providence thing is also something that I encountered, I think, within a tweet a few months back, and it popped up again within my timeline from another person. And this is sort of very telling about miracles because there was apparently a situation where two teenagers were drowning and they were saved by a boat called the Amen. And
okay.
this was supposed to be a miracle. And what I was saying back then, what I said recently is, okay, let's say that the boat was called the Quran or the Allahu Akbar or the whatever. Would that make you Muslim if that
Mm-hmm.
had been the case?
Yeah, I'm guessing not.
Yeah. And
And
it's
that's,
just so funny that God is nowadays reduced to these miracles that could very well be perfectly well explained by natural occurrences, because I think there's no shortage of boat owners who are Christian.
yeah, it's the God
Just
of
saying.
diminishing returns. Apparently he's making the universe, drowning people and smiting people with plagues, and then he, cures a few sick people, and then now he's appearing on toast and causing a slight breeze. It's, you know, and that's the thing too, is with the modern age of information, you get to find out about all the things that happen. And improbable things happen all the time. They just don't happen a lot in the broader context of the number of things that happen. So
Yeah,
coincidences exist, and therefore I'm special. Not really.
yeah. In order
And
maybe to bring it back to the New Year thing, 1 year time, are there any other traditions within Christianity for New Year? Sort of.
hmm, not that I'm aware of. It isn't an inherently Christian holiday. Um, I think it's tacked on to Christmas. But I don't know of any specifically Christian things, although other ex-evangelicals or believers, feel free to let us know in the comments below any specifically Christian traditions associated with the new year. Um, or if it was just, everybody decide to read the Bible more. because, Bible.
Yeah,
Good old days. Uh, I think I'm going to read a bit of Hitchens to clear my palate.
yeah. That's the great resolution. Reading
Mm,
Hitchens.
yes, Hitchens. Just to clear my mind of the cobwebs. Well, I think I'm going to have to get more coffee. So I hope you will forgive me if I resolve to get more coffee. And I think we can leave it there.
Yeah,
All right. Well,
sounds like a plan.
good. Thank you for joining us. And please like, comment, subscribe. Just let us know what you think. We like to hear other people's opinions. And if you think I'm crazy, hey, tell me. It's always good to know.
Yeah, not.
Have a wonderful new year and enjoy yourselves.
Yeah.
May you.
And also make sure to tune in for next week because next week it's gonna be about Christianity and how it pertains to sexuality, especially how they view homosexual people and
Oh,
the
yes.
LGBTQ community in general.
Yes. And apologies to the LGBTQ community for, well, everything. That's just. Yeah. Well, I can share some of my experiences from growing up in that, and hopefully you can share more from Germany, but I'll admit I'm probably going to need a drink for that one.
Yeah.
Well, we will see you all next time, people. Have a wonderful week and reason bless.